This is a special video voted on by my subscribers for hitting the 200 mark. Thank you for getting me this far, and here is the 300 with many more to come. The United States Armed Forces has a heavy presence across all Fallout games, often being the driving force behind much of the pre-war events and lore that fuels many of the stories we enjoy so much, thanks to the ever-present war machine that has consumed American society. So let's get into the video, and please let me know what you think of my new intro. The United States of America was the most powerful country on Earth preceding the Great War of 2077, with over 400 million civilians, ability to draw upon the entire natural resources of North America, and an unmatched advanced economy that created marvels of technology that all fed into the mighty military-industrial complex to create the fearsome United States Armed Forces, which was not only able to fend off an invasion, but strike back with an unprecedented counter-invasion of its adversary on the other side of the globe in the midst of the worst resource crisis Earth had ever seen. This great feat of American exceptionalism was a combined undertaking by the 5 branches of the military within the Fallout universe and the many civilian agencies that lent support, these being the Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard, while government organizations like the Defense Intelligence Agency spied on the Chinese with surprising results. This video will only touch on the Army and Marines due to a time crunch, with a follow-up covering the remaining branches and a third on associated support agencies. But all these organizations occupied a specific role in the military, with some redundant overlaps between the services to ensure a level of interoperability and cross-service relations. To start us off today is the Army, which is the largest branch by number and maintains the main standing force that fights wars on land, making it the primary frontline workhorse of America's military that does most of the heavy lifting, and is thus expected to be proficient in land combat and able to conduct extended campaigns. Traditionally, this was done through a concept called combined arms warfare, where all branches of the military work together in the war, with the Army's role being mechanized warfare, which is when armored vehicles rapidly transport infantry across the battlefield and fight alongside them during an attack. This utilized heavy armor like tanks and IFVs to support the infantry in the fight, while lighter jeeps and trucks help transport soldiers and supplies around the battlefield to keep the force at peak strength. Mechanized warfare gave the Army unprecedented mobility, allowing it to strike fast and hard anywhere on the battlefield and rapidly push deep into enemy lines with heavy armor. However, faith in this concept was being lost during the resource wars as fuel and other essential resources became scarce, which made it impossible to deploy and operate hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles like they did in the past. So the Army adopted a static defensive strategy during the 2060s and began construction of the Anchorage front line around the city to protect what little oil America had left. But this idea rapidly fell apart once China invaded Alaska in 2066. The attack was preceded by paratroopers landing behind the Anchorage front line that trapped many of the soldiers there and caused utter chaos in the rear, before the Chinese army proper attacked, which crushed the defenders between the two forces. This incapacitated the Anchorage front line and forced the survivors to retreat toward the city, giving up ground for time and trying to stall the overwhelming Chinese force that had landed, and yet nothing seemed to work. The Chinese People Liberation Army continued to encroach until a year later in 2067, when some form of armored warfare would return with the first suits of T-45 power armor being deployed onto the battlefield. All of a sudden, the Army was able to stop the Chinese dead in their tracks and hold the line, allowing them to dig in and create the current front line that it would exist until 2076. The introduction of power armor into the Army revolutionized infantry warfare. Now units who were previously centered on machine guns now revolved around this hulking, heavily armored beast with a minigun, who can take a weapon that used to take 4, 5, or even 6 minutes to crew to be used by a single man to devastating effect, which increased the mobility and firepower of the units. However, that was not the Army's only prerogative, because besides the rank and file that made up most of the Army's personnel was their special forces. These were the Army Rangers, a highly trained and deadly light infantry outfit that is capable of deploying anywhere on Earth in under 18 hours, potentially by parachuting onto the battlefield, and is designed to raid enemy position. Rangers are the tip of the spear, designed to go before a general attack. As the motto says, Rangers lead the way and disrupt the enemies for the follow-up infantry. We get a brief look at the capabilities of these deadly warriors in Fallout 76 with Tagady's Thunder, who on October 23rd was on a training mission in Appalachia, playing war games against Marines that were standing in for Chinese soldiers. Their mission was to infiltrate the Marines' base to sabotage vehicles and gather intelligence. Tagady wanted to do it the Ranger way, by attacking fast and hard with guns blazing. This was to prepare the Thunder for an upcoming mission deep behind enemy lines in an unknown province of China for the same purpose, to disrupt operations and destroy equipment vital to the war effort, probably to precede an attack. Other special forces organizations were probably present in the Army that have not made an appearance yet, such as the Green Berets, who are similar to the Rangers but specialized in asymmetric warfare like guerrilla actions and sabotage. Alternatively, the other organizations could be too secretive to be mentioned in anything but a high brass briefing like Delta Force. This was potentially the Army's most elite Tier 1 Special Forces unit that specialized in counterterrorism and hostage rescue, whose missions would be obscured by black ink and would often work in tandem with other Special Forces branches who would provide perimeter security and backup for Delta Force missions. But even these elite warriors that are capable so much are not the extent by which the Army could operate, because the US Army had specialized formations within its structure for specific jobs. One of the most famous are the paratroopers, a division, the 82nd Airborne, known as the All-Americans, makes an appearance in New Vegas. Paratroopers are a rapid reaction force that, much like the Rangers, can be deployed anywhere across the globe in less than a day. This division, or a part of it, was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas for training exercises at the time of the Great War. Paratroopers were trained to jump out of airplanes and land behind enemy lines to capture objectives and create confusion prior to an attack, just like what the Chinese did to start the Sino-American War. While on the other side of the country in West Virginia, the 12th Mountain Division was tasked with quarantining the town of Huntersville. This division was specially trained for mountainous and cold environment warfare, where high altitudes and freezing temperatures could compromise the combat effectiveness of your typical soldier. The infantry of the 12th was conditioned and equipped to fight in snow-swept and thin-aired environments. We could also assume other divisions that specialize in desert, jungle, and urban warfare existed too, which would allow these units to train other Army units in the basics of combat in these specific environments, a must for a military that operates globally. The Army participated in many projects and operated many facilities across the country to develop advanced weaponry and conduct research. Some of these involved highly unethical experiments and procedures on what were seen as expendable assets, i.e. Chinese prisoners of war, criminals, and even civilians in the name of progress. West Tech was the biggest beneficiary of the Army's increasing interest in developing tomorrow's military today to beat the Chinese, and as America's largest defense contractor, West Tech was the logical choice for the task. The greatest publicly known feat West Tech accomplished was through its Advanced Weapons Division, which was responsible for the T-45 and later T-51 and T-60 models of power armor. But at the same time, their biomedical science wing had been secretly hard at work with the Forced Evolutionary Virus Project. This was originally started to combat the new plague in 2055 under the codename Pan-Immunivirum Project, but by 2076 the Army had taken over the company's California Research Center and was transferring all work on FEV to the Mariposa military base, where mass unwilling human testing took place. Besides this, the Army contracted General Atomics for the robotic expertise to develop militarized robots like the Mr. Gutsy, Assaultron, and the terrifyingly massive Sultrybot to augment the military struggle against China. But arguably the scariest robot was the RoboBrain, which was a three-way collaboration between Robco, General Atomics, and the Army that aimed and succeeded in using human brains to control robots because of its superior processing and memory capabilities. This was conducted in Boston under a Robco service shop where American prisoners and asylum patients had their brains scooped and placed inside a robo-brain chassis, but most of these participants were too mentally ill to properly function, often suffering from schizophrenia and other mental conditions even after their minds were wiped, so those brains were disposed of by incineration. And yet again, the army became tired of dealing with private companies, so resorted to firing both Robco and General Atomics to conduct the project themselves, to the detriment of efficiency and humanity. The counterpart to the Army is the United States Marine Corps. This is America's force at ready, and its main focus was amphibious operations, notably invasions. The Marines had a fearsome reputation with America's enemies, often being portrayed as crazy and insane, with rumors circulating that Marines are drawn from the most violent prisoners to put their sadistic nature to good use. Obviously, this was not true, but Marines did have a reputation for savagery in a fight, as their beloved nickname, Devil Dogs, suggests. This was mainly in part because the branch was self-sufficient with their own armored forces, air support, and equipment independent of other branches, which gave an unprecedented level of coordination between each wing of the Corps, and fostered a brotherhood among the airmen, tankers, and infantry because they were all Marines first and wanted to protect their brothers, which was typically not seen with inter-service operations. So Marine pilots would be much more aggressive in their attacks, often flying only a few hundred feet above the ground to get the most out of each run, while tankers and armored crews stuck close to the infantry to play a key support role for the average Marine with a rifle who attacked with a wild frenzy, making Marine attacks distinct from the Army brethren. At the onset of the Sino-American War in 2066, the Marines would have been some of the first reinforcements to show up in Alaska to support the alien defenses of the Anchorage front line. There they would stay for some time as the military threw everything in the kitchen sink at the Chinese to try and stop their march towards Anchorage. But after the line had been stabilized with the introduction of T-45, the Marine Corps High Command started to think about how they could strike back against the Chinese. The plan they came up with involved liberating the Philippines, or part of the country like the island of Luzon, from the Chinese occupiers, and use this as a staging ground to invade China proper. This culminated in the invasion of Shantou and Shanghai in 2074 that immediately bogged down into another brutal stalemate. The Marines were boxed in for nearly 2 years as China laid siege to these cities that led to yet more brutal and bloody fighting, but this time in a dense urban environment. But in early 2076, 10 years after the war began and 2 after the Marines counter-invaded China, the brand new T-51 model of power armor will be deployed en masse across the American military. And it was this revolutionary piece of equipment that allowed the Marines trapped within Shantou and Shanghai to break out, giving the angry Leathernecks a mobility and firepower advantage over the Chinese, who simply could not keep up anymore. So the Marines had a free hand to crusade through the country after breaking out, spreading north, south, and inland to invade more cities, because by now the Chinese economy was faltering and supply lines crumbling. And with Alaska being liberated by the army, the entire American war machine can now bear down on China with all of its might, all led by the Marines, who fought their way over 600 miles inland to the Chinese capital of Beijing, deep into the Gobi Desert and beyond, culminating in the Great War a year later, after the Marines had thoroughly kicked the Chinese People's Liberation Army ass and now had them in a chokehold. The Chinese, presumably left with no other option, went nuclear and ordered a first strike on the United States. Secondary roles that the Marine Corps played was as security aboard ships, naval stations, and protecting American embassies across the globe, or those that were made after the near total isolation of the United States during the Resource Wars. The Marines and Army did conduct war games with each other, often loaning units to play the role of an opposition force, as we saw with Haggerty's Thunder. This was, in part, thanks to both branches' unique philosophy of warfighting, which gave each a different perspective and an element of interoperability. The Navy and Marines had a special and deep relationship that stretched far back in time to the conception of America. The identity of the United States Marine Corps at this time was still unknown and debated between shipborne soldiers and soldiering sailors. sailors, as Marines were originally conceived as landing forces with the fleet. This uncertainty was finally settled with the evolution of American foreign policy into a dedicated expeditionary force conjoined to the Navy, i.e. shipborne soldiers to impose the United States' will upon its sphere of influence and eventually the world. Between World War II and the Sino-American War, the relationship would deepen with Marine fighter wings stationed on and operating from aircraft carriers, where they protect the ground forces from enemy planes and played a vital support role by strafing and bombing ground targets. Just like the Army, the Marines did have their own specialized units within their wider organization. Force Recon are scouts and infiltrators who, as their name suggests, are masters of reconnaissance, or the gathering information about the target prior to an attack. This is to get a more accurate understanding of enemy strengths and weaknesses so they can be exploited. Marine Raiders are unconfirmed Marine special forces that would be the equivalent to the Rangers and Green Berets. Their objectives are to conduct raids against enemy positions using small unit infiltration tactics and asymmetric warfare to get an edge over their opponents. Raiders are aggressive and use brute strength to cause a disproportionate amount of damage with the smallest possible team, which in comparison to the Recon Brethren, who are quiet and stealthy. As of right now, only Force Recon is hinted at existing within the games. This comes from the Far Harbor DLC, with the unique Marine Recon variation of the Marine Assault Armor and description given to the tactical helmet. But I do believe Raiders may exist still, as the newly issued Marine Assault Armor is a heavy piece of equipment designed for brutish protection against heavy gunfire. This armor was not in widespread use yet, probably just entering field trials with domestic Marines by the time of the Great War, with the only known units to receive it being the garrison at Mount Desert Naval Facility and the Marines conducting war games with Taggart Thunder in West Virginia, and would have been the perfect piece of equipment for the Raiders. This suit was specifically designed for assault operations, using rigid heavy plates with a watertight design to keep the wearer protected even in the harshest of conditions, especially naval invasions where the Marines may be expected to wade onto the shore through cold water while being fired at. It is composed of 3 different pieces: the armor itself that covers the wearer chest to toe in space-age polymer and ceramics, designed to absorb and disperse high-energy kinetic impacts, trading mobility for protection. Every piece of the armor is designed to keep each Marine on the front line for as long as possible, from the outstanding level of protection to how every available piece of real estate is covered in pockets for convenient equipment storage. Underneath the armor is the wetsuit that insulates the wearer from cold water and hot weather they may experience during invasions, or even chemical and biological agents that China was known to use out of desperation. And finally, there are 2 headpieces that were designed to go with the Marine armor. The Marine Assault Helmet was a standard issue piece designed to lock into the wetsuit. It was big and bulky to take a beating, with an integrated gas mask and visor to protect from chemical and biological weapons, with a flashlight over the left eye for convenience. The Marine Tactical Helmet was a specialized alternative that was sleek for stealthy infiltration and reconnaissance operations. This would have been favored by Force Recon and snipers thanks to its compact and sleek design, who would ditch the noisy and bulky assault armor but keep the wetsuit for its mobility, agility, and stealth characteristics. Compared to the Army, who primarily used the standard combat armor, Marines had a very nice new piece of specialized equipment that I bet many Army grunts would have died to get their hands on. Combat armor came in 3 distinct classes: light, sturdy, and heavy, each to fulfill a specific job within the military, and was always worn over Army and military fatigues. Light is probably for specialty and rear line soldiers such as artillery crews and truck drivers who do need protection but are not expected to fight on a daily basis, so their armor is minimal and non-cumbersome, with plates only covering vital areas like the sternum, shoulders, and thighs, so the mobility is not hindered, but gives just enough protection in case the soldiers found themselves under attack. The sturdy set is for the average infantryman and is a healthy mix between protection and maneuverability. It is made of the same plate as the light, with a few additional pieces like the elbow and forearm plates, matching knee and shin guards, a cup covering the groin, and a layer of soft armor enclosing the upper body to protect vital organs but not ruin the wearer's comfort. And then we have the heavy, which could be used by shock troopers and raiding parties who are expected to charge headfirst at the Chinese across no man's land and jump into the enemy's trenches. Everything about this kit is much beefier than the previous 2 sets, like the Marine Assault Armor, with much larger and more resilient armor plates that cover their entire body head to toe. Shoulder pads protrude up and out to protect either side of their head, while rigid collar cups the back back and sides of the wearer's necks to shield them from airburst shell shrapnel and fragments when combined with the helmet that dips low around the neck to neatly meet the neck guard around back and cover the wearer's ears. The armor plates are much thicker now and completely enclose the entire upper body under the full suit that also wraps around both thighs and connects with the shin protectors thanks to articulating knee joints, creating a super heavy suit of armor that would have been wildly hot and uncomfortable to wear, but yet again trading mobility for protection, which was a trend the United States appears to be following across its military. Infantry equipment, power armor, and tanks are all getting thicker armor in an effort to lower attrition rates and keep more of its fighting forces on the front lines. Specialized versions of combat armor were produced for the invasion of China. This was coined the desert suit, which was worn under a duster to protect against the harsh winds and sand. It had a distinctive gas mask attached to the helmet, but oddly enough, no leg armor. Instead, comfort took priority and blue jeans became standard leg wear. An infrared sensor and emitter was mounted on the right side of the helmet that allowed the wearer to see a thermal image displayed within the eyepieces, allowing the Marines who wore this suit during the Gobi Desert campaign to see in the dark and have a distinct advantage over the enemy. But this armor was used throughout the Chinese theater, as Staff Sergeant R.B. Vickers served 9 months in Shanghai during the invasion of the city, and 3 in Nanking wearing his desert armor. Although this style is most associated with the Marines, the Army utilized it too, as riot control versions are found in the Ashton and Hopeville military bases. All models of military-issue body armor were very advanced polymer pieces of hardware that gave the wearers high levels of protection. Although power armor was best, which both the Marines and Army heavily relied on throughout the war, the T-45 was the first and most common suit deployed onto the battlefield. Its introduction was a game changer for America, giving the infantry a highly mobile, nuclear-powered, heavy fire support platform on the front lines when they needed it most. This suit was not perfect by any means though, and suffered from a variety of problems: exposed components, severe power usage, heavy weight, poor balance, and a few other issues. But when it is either the T-45 or nothing, you are glad for what you can get, even if it was mostly a defensive tool. But when the T-51 was issued 10 years later, it changed everything. The T-51 was much more reliable and better in every way over its predecessor. It now had a nearly infinite battery life thanks to a fusion pack built in, composite ceramic armoring instead of the heavy steel plates that gives T-51 much better protection and drastically cuts down on weight, and an overhauled actuation system that replaced hydraulics with servos to make its mobility buttery smooth and help balance the suit out. It was these two suits of power armor that first stopped the Chinese dead in their tracks, then broke the Dragon's back, not because of how well armored they were, but because of what they could bring to a fight: heavy ordnance on a mobile grounded single-man platform. The weapons a man in power armor could use were devastating. Miniguns could shoot thousands of 5mm rounds a minute, 50 caliber heavy machine guns could cut through waves of infantry, laser gatlings and plasma casters that disintegrated their targets, automatic ray launchers, or most destructive of all, the Fat Man nuclear catapult, capable of launching a football-sized warhead with an explosive yield of roughly 1 ton. It was the ability of single men to wield such powerful weapons that made power armor so effective during the Sino-American War and well after. But it wasn't just those heavy weapons that were used. Both branches armed their infantry with a varying mix of ballistic, laser, and highly advanced plasma weaponry. Most had rifles firing the tried and true 5.56x45 cartridge, like the R91 assault rifle, which the Army National Guard relied upon. It was a simple, roll-delayed blowback rifle that gave the National Guard a reliable, if basic, firearm, while many soldiers in the Army were equipped with the venerated combat rifle, which is chambered in 45 ACP. The gun usually came with a very short carbine-length barrel around 10 inches long for fighting the close confines of trenches in urban environment, while the Marines had a very similar weapon called the radium rifle that was essentially the same thing but irradiated the bullets as it fired. Both were perfect for being lightweight bullet hoses used in close quarters fighting. The assault rifle is a light water-cooled machine gun used by both branches that filled the squad automatic weapon or saw roll. It was designed designed to be man-portable and provide sustained firepower to beat back wave after wave of Chinese soldiers, but still be light enough to be easily carried during an attack. It was also chambered in 5.56 and fed from the left side using either a standard 30-round box magazine or 80-round drum. Reservists and recruits used surplus M16 style service rifles and M4 assault carbines for the training that had been reactivated during the war to supplement the military's stock of arms. These replaced the combat and assault rifles in the training roles, allowing those that would have been used to teach trainees to be sent to the front lines. But at least one unit in occupied Quebec, Canada was armed with the service rifle, with some even being chambered in the powerful 12.7 Beowulf to guard checkpoints and drop Canadian separatists with a single shot. Two pistols served the military well throughout the Sino-American War. The .44 Magnum was an unofficial revolver that many officers may have bought as a personal firearm to replace their issued N99. It is a single-action, swing-out cylinder K-frame revolver favored by fans of Dirty Harry. It should be noted that National Guardsmen and military police seem to have this revolver more often, suggesting a similar situation to the service rifle by replacing service weapons at home for use on the front line. But the N99 10mm pistol was the military's official sidearm. This was a big and heavy-duty, metal-framed automatic pistol designed for reliable stopping power, and with a 12-round detachable box magazine, it was more than capable of this. Officers would have been given one as a status symbol, while vehicle crews, heavy weapon specialists, and potentially pilots would be issued one as an emergency backup weapon. The N99 also had a fully automatic setting, turning it into a machine pistol that Special Forces teams may have favored, especially when paired with an extended 24-round magazine. Alternatively, Special Forces may have opted for the MP9 SMG. This is also a 10mm weapon with a high rate of fire and controllable recoil thanks to its roll-delayed blowback system that made the gun extremely reliable and perfect for covert operations or urban warfare. These are the typical weapons found in American hands during the Sino-American War, but during the early 2070s, the military became transfixed on replacing ballistic weapons with laser and plasma weaponry to make America's finest, the meanest and deadliest sons of bitches on the battlefield. The most common laser rifle used during the war was the AER-9, a highly modular all-in-one weapon system that can be configured for anything from a slightly bulky pistol to a rifle, sniper rifle, and even a shotgun by changing parts and components out. It was powered by a microfusion cell, which depending on the setting and configuration can fire anywhere between 9 and 36 shots from a single cell before needing to be reloaded. The pistol was occasionally used, however, the rifle was the most common, especially in its fully automatic, multi-barreled configuration, but the sniper mode would have been deadly effective thanks to the nature of laser weapons. Each shot travels at the speed of light and in a straight line, effectively making this the most precise sniping system ever devised. State-of-the-art versions of laser weapons were in development. The AER-12 was the latest and greatest in America's arsenal, but only saw action with a few units who often complained about its fragile construction, while only a single prototype, AER-14, was known to exist deep within the bowels of Volt 22. This had a distinctive green beam, while the previous models had red. The laser rifle's big brother was the Gatling laser, and puts the base model to shame. This beast of a gun consists of multiple AER-9 rifle barrels mounted together on a rotating cylinder that fires at a blistering fast rate to devastating effect. The laser Gatling is powered by a fusion core, which gives this full auto laser cannon a 500 shot magazine and the power armor troopers using this weapon a terrifying level of firepower. The second generation of American energy weapons was plasma. These are highly sophisticated weapons that superheat gas into a plasma that was then channeled down the superconducting barrel with magnetic fields. They are powered by a number of different energy sources, but most use the plasma cartridge, a container with an energy source and gas held within, but some use a separate gas cartridge and microfusion cells for energy. The most common model utilized a modular design like the AER-9 laser platform with a smaller pistol, rifle, sniper, and more configurations, but this model is unnamed in the games, so we refer to it as Model X. Unlike the laser weapons though, plasma moves very slowly through the air, so these weapons were reserved for urban combat. The pistol is large and unwieldy, almost like a brick requiring two hands, while the rifle configuration is somewhat more reasonable in terms of handling. With an overall
overall short barrel length, but most of the weight centered around the plasma chamber.
The rifle's well balanced and would be a very effective close quarters weapon capable of melting armor and burning through flesh, possibly even destabilizing the victim's molecular structure to turn the person into a soupy green puddle. The sniper configuration is less than effective because of how slowly plasma bolts move through the air and how bright they are, making this a nearly useless version of the gun. The urban plasma rifle was a second design that was heavily used by the military to supplement Model X in urban warfare. It was powered by a microfusion cell held inside a wireframe basket with a separate gas cartridge, and had a slightly more crude appearance. Its stock was skeletonized and many exposed cables and components protruded from the body, and chunky plastic furniture gave this a cheap and unfinished feel. However, the weapon was very effective for its design purpose. But kings of urban warfare would have been the Plasma Flamer and Winchester P94 Plasma Caster. These differed in projection, as the Flamer was a barrel on the plasma rifle and simply fired an uncontrolled spray, while the Plasma Caster used electromagnetic claws on the end of the barrel to launch and stabilize a single large orb with much more range and stopping power. Both of these fulfilled the same basic purpose of clearing buildings and terrorizing the enemy, but the Flamer barrel was lighter and more maneuverable, while the Caster was bigger and more powerful. Hip-fired weapon with an attached backpack was originally an industrial plasma cutter pushed into military service. This necessitated a militarized version called the P94M that was designed to be more compact and rifle-like by removing the backpack and adding a stock pistol grip and carry handle. Adjacent to both of these was the Gatling Plasma, which was very similar to the Gatling laser but used plasma cores to power and spew an endless stream of small plasma orbs. Alternative weapons of this caliber used by the armed forces were the Flamer and Incinerator. These are slightly cruder, relying on jellied gasoline called napalm to burn trenches and buildings out. The Flamer was a traditional flamethrower, which shot a constant stream of burning napalm out with very limited range, while the Incinerator projected orbs of burning napalm over greater distance to harass the enemy. Both had their advantages, the Flamer being best for trench raids where it can flood the immediate area with 1000+ degree gasoline, while the Incinerator would be perfect for shooting into the upper floors of a building to flush the enemy out. And finally, for the specialty emerging weapons both the Army and Marines used are the Gauss guns. These are weapons that are chambered for the tiny 2mm electromagnetic cartridge, which consists of two parts. The projectile, a ferromagnetic slug that would be made of either steel, nickel, cobalt, or an alloy, thanks to how readily available these are, and a power source, probably a fusion cell. The way a Gauss rifle works was by propelling the ferro slug down the barrel using powerful electromagnets without allowing it to touch the barrel walls, accelerating the projectile to hypersonic speeds to obliterate the target on impact. The M72 was the first known model of Gauss rifle utilized by the military, and was reserved for the anti-material and sniping roles due to its low rate of fire and high stopping power. The rifle worked by charging its capacitors, which can take a few seconds before discharging in an instant to sling the roughly 50-grain slug at a blistering fast 5,000 feet per second to hit with a minimum of 3,000 foot-pounds of energy, or around that of the 308. These are just my estimates, and the speed could easily be 8,000 feet per second and deliver a phenomenal 7,000 or more foot-pounds of energy. The system relies on its incredible speed to deliver a killing blow, and an excellent ballistic coefficient to preserve velocity over great distances, while its tiny cross-section means all of this energy is going to be concentrated on a very small area, which allows the slug to disable a vehicle by punching through its engine block. A refined yet unnamed prototype Gauss rifle was in development for the military, but never was or saw limited deployment. This had an enclosed barrel, shrouding the magnets within to protect the hardware from mud and rain. The rifle itself is much smaller and compact, allowing it to be lighter and easier to use in claustrophobic urban warfare environments. The weapon used a separate side-mounted magazine that protruded from the right to house the 2mm EMC ammunition, and used a crank handle on the left to load individual rounds. Alongside the M72 was the PPK-12 Gauss pistol, which fulfilled fulfilled the same purpose but in a small and compact package that compromises stopping power for convenience. The Gauss minigun is the heavy version of this weapon's concept, and it's designed to rapidly fire the tiny yet mighty 2mm electromagnetic cartridge to shred anything downrange. This is a massive evolution of the Gauss design, turning it from a single-shot precision weapon into a hose that can send a wall of hypersonic steel at the enemy. Then to round this out, we have the specialized weapons. The DKS-501 is a semi-automatic sniper/designated marksman rifle chambered in .308 that was perfect for picking careless Chinese off in the trenches and harassing the enemy in the urban environment the Marines found themselves in during the invasion of China. The DKS had an effective range out to about 500 yards with its low-power 4x zoom scope and was given to the best shooter within a company for the express purpose of giving the soldiers an integrated precision weapon to shoot through bunker windows and kill machine gunners. While its contemporary is an M40-like bolt-action sniper rifle also chambered in .308. This is a classic precision sniping weapon designed for accurate long-distance shooting to eliminate individual targets with a single round out to 1,000 yards. The rifle had a lightweight polymer stock, fluted barrel, and was paired with either an 8x or 12x zoom scope to give the shooter a clear image of their target. Snipers worked in teams, always pairing with a spotter that would call out targets and give shooting corrections. Multiple sniper teams would occasionally work together to provide a disproportionately large effect on the battlefield, often locking entire areas of the front down, where if anybody shows their head, it is liable to be taken off. Occasionally, snipers may be sent behind enemy lines to eliminate high-value targets and gather intelligence in what is known as a scout sniper role. The anti-material rifle is a 50 caliber giant of a bolt-action rifle designed to destroy enemy material, which is military speak for equipment, so radios, radars, and light armored vehicle engines. But this weapon can be used in the normal sniping role as well and becomes very useful in urban combat because of its incredible stopping power that allows it to punch through brick walls and kill anything hiding behind it. The M79 is a break-action 40mm grenade launcher used by the Army and Marines to lob high explosives at the enemy. This was particularly useful in trench warfare, where the grenades can be arced into the enemy trenches from a ways away, and was equally useful in urban warfare for clearing rooms. This was a man-portable version with the intent to support infantry on the ground level with high explosives, while the power armor or vehicle-mounted automatic grenade launcher was intended to saturate an area of the battlefield in high explosives to deny it from the enemies, creating what is called a dead zone, where enemy infantry or light vehicles cannot cross. The missile launcher was a more powerful and longer-range man-portable high-explosive weapon. This was also break action and used 84mm missiles as ammunition, which can be dumbfired at a static target like a bunker or tank, or smart heat-seeking munitions if a targeting computer is installed on the launcher, giving this launcher a fire and forget capability that is perfect for light anti-aircraft work and hitting targets at range. The vehicles both branches used are interchangeable, just like the infantry weapons. Power armor was the most common armor to support and would lead both Marine and soldiers into battle wielding heavy crew-served weapons like it was nothing. T-45 was the first and most numerous version, with a long legacy stretching all the way back to 2067 when the first suit saw action in Alaska. But this early and flawed design was severely limited on the battlefield and served mainly in the defensive role, while its successor became the king of Anchorage. We are, of course, talking about the T-51. This suit was responsible for breaking the stalemate of battle and pushing the Chinese out of Alaska in 2076 before eventually leading the march on Nanking and Beijing that saw these cities fall in mere weeks. The T-60 was supposed to follow on as a successor to the T-45, possibly even being a field upgrade kit for this now legacy suit, but none saw frontline duty and are only known to have served with the National Guard units on the home front. The APC was a heavily armed and armored six-wheel vehicle designed to rapidly transport troops into battle and support them as they fought, meaning the armored personnel carrier was actually an infantry fighting vehicle. It was fast and agile on its six wheels, with its fusion engine giving it nearly unlimited range to be a terror on the battlefield. The vehicle appears to be specifically designed for urban environments. 6 soldiers or 2 power armor units can be carried internally and exit out of the back ramp, with the infantry and power armor guarding the flanks while the IFV spits high explosives or smoke shells down streets to cover their advance. This is done mostly with the dual coaxial, snub-nosed cannons on either side of the face that are probably fast-firing low-velocity 57 or 75mm and designed to frag streets with shrapnel to create dead zones, much like the automatic grenade launcher, but on a much larger scale. Each can be operated independently and swivel around within its ball turret to cover the dismounted infantry, but have limited arcs of fire. Although the vehicle does lack a mounted machine gun, which would be essential for urban fighting, but on either side of the hull are ports the onboard infantry can shoot through. Mounted on the roof is a massive 105mm howitzer. This was the vehicle's big boomstick that was aimed by a periscope and is intended for direct fire support to level entire buildings with high explosive artillery when the Chinese within are being stubborn or possibly attack enemy vehicles. While the main battle tank was America's primary heavy ground support, this is a gargantuan armored vehicle that could take as much punishment as it could dish out, with twin 140mm main high velocity guns that were each capable of throwing high explosive and armor piercing shells downrange that could either demolish an entire building or punch right through it depending on the type of shell. But looking at the vehicle, we can dissect its anatomy more closely. The tank rides on 4 sets of tracks, with the rear pair being longer and tucked under the body, while the front pair are shorter and stretched out to either side of the tank. A setup which I imagine would be a mechanical nightmare to maintain, with twice as many weak points for a problem to occur. At the rear is the fusion engine with 2 fusion cores encased within heavy armor. Centered on the vehicle is its massive turret, atop which are 2 cupolas, one on the front right that the commander would use to direct the tank and a larger cupola on the rear left. Surrounding the rear cupola is a rail that may have been used to mount a machine gun to act as a point defense weapon, which appears to be one of the tank's main weaknesses because the vehicle would be very vulnerable to infantry without some sort of small arms protection. This was probably an M250 caliber heavy machine gun or possibly water-cooled assault rifle SAW. The other primary weakness of the vehicle is its antiquated riveted armor, which when hit can cause the rivets to shear and become projectiles inside the tank, killing the crew without the Chinese shell penetrating. And finally is the Vertibird, a vertical takeoff landing aircraft known as a VTOL that entered service in 2072 and saw limited service with the Army, but it would not surprise me if the Marines also got their hands on this advanced aircraft. What made the Vertibird special was its unique tilt-wing design that gave the Vertibird the vertical landing capabilities of a helicopter but the speed of a plane, making it a highly versatile aircraft that provided the military an unheard level of flexibility where the Vertibird could quickly get into a combat zone to do what it needed, then fly away just as quickly. The only problem being this version of the Vertibird was exclusively a transport model, designed to carry infantry and cargo, and as such was slow and bulky, with light armor and arms. However, a gunship model was planned and in development under the codename XBV-02, which was a program intended to create a second-generation Vertibird universal airframe that could be configured for the gunship or transport role or any other job envisioned by the military. This had an expected delivery date sometime in 2085, so was not able to see deployment during the Sino-American War. But with the first generation of the Vertibird, the aircraft had a very big fuselage to transport large amounts of cargo, and as such had wide sliding doors on either side of the cargo bay that was perfect for infantry to quickly dismount and climb into. The vehicle's armament was limited to 2 forward-facing fixed 50 caliber machine guns under either side of the cockpit and 2 door-mounted miniguns used exclusively to protect dismounted infantry and not for attack runs, although it would not surprise me if the miniguns were used in a chopper gunner-esque close support role by over-eager door gunners with itchy trigger fingers more often than not. So that is the Army and Marines of the American military and Fallout. Both were large and powerful organizations that dominated the battlefield with advanced technology in their fight against China. The Army had huge sway in America thanks to its extensive reach into the halls of Congress and deep corporate ties that made it a dominant force in American society, while the Marines stayed tied to their larger naval brother and focused primarily on the war overseas. A special thank you to my friend Robin for helping me with this script. Stay tuned for the next video, which will focus on the Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard, with a third covering the role civilian civilian agencies played in the Sino-American War coming soon. If you have any suggestions or want to chat, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as well, and I will see you in the next video.